The braking is the most brutal thing about a Formula One car. It can reach up to 6G of deceleration. There is no car on the planet that brakes like a Formula One. But what makes them so special and how do they differ from the conventional brakes of a street car? Stay tuned to this video to discover how a Formula One goes from 300 km/h to 0 in just 3.79 seconds. Formula One is innovation, technology and development. That's why brake discs are engineering masterpieces. They are extremely sophisticated and efficient, but yes, they are also very delicate, and engineers and drivers have to be very precise to make them work well.
Max Verstappen, the most important win of his Formula One career. He picks up his 10th win of the season. 10 wins in a calendar year to match the 10.
But what is the function of the braking system? Well, the idea in both racing and road cars is to transform kinetic energy into heat energy. You should know that energy is neither created nor destroyed, it is only transformed. In this case, when a car is in motion, there is heat energy to reduce the speed of the vehicle. And this is where the braking system comes into play, whose operation is quite simple. Basically, it is a hydraulic system that when the brake is pressed, causes pistons to move the brake pads, which are located in the brake caliper, and therefore the pads will come into contact with the brake disc. This will produce a friction between the pad and the disc, which will produce heat and accelerate the vehicle. In a street car, to make driving much more comfortable, we have a servo brake, which increases the force that the driver makes on the brake pedal. On the other hand, in a Formula One, the brake servo does not exist, and that is why the drivers make more than 100 kilos of force on the brake. But also, in Formula One, ABS is not allowed. They are the best drivers in the world, and that's why. They don't need driving aids. On the other hand, in street cars, ABS is an element that has saved many lives and is a basic safety feature. What this device does, by means of electronics, is to prevent the wheel from locking in the event of sudden braking. But what exactly is the Formula One braking system like? Well, in a Formula One, although the idea is the same, the system is a little more complex. Since there are two master cylinders, one is connected to the front wheels and the other to the rear, because it is important to have two separate systems. In a Formula One car, in order to extract the maximum performance from the car, drivers must be able to choose how much the front brakes brake and how much the rear brakes brake, as not all braking is the same. For this reason, drivers measure brake distribution. How much does the car brake with the front wheels and how much with the rear wheels? And this is one of the parameters that are constantly changing throughout the lap to make the car as fast and stable as possible. The braking system of the front wheels is quite similar to what we find in a street car, a hydraulic system that moves the pads and make them come into contact with the disc. However, at the rear, things get a little more complex. The rear of the car can decelerate in three different ways. The first is by the action of the brakes. The second is by engine braking. And the third is the resistance caused by the MPH when it regenerates energy. The MPH is a motor generator, and of course, when it is recharging energy, it means that it is also producing a resistance that will be braking the rear wheels. And in order to control these three elements, the control unit is used. More specifically, the so-called brake-by-wire, which is basically a system that optimizes braking to the maximum. Depending on the engine map of the car, the rear wheels will be braked more or less aggressively. Basically, it is a system that allows you to control how much energy you want to recover during braking, how much braking you want to do with conventional brakes, and how much engine braking does the rider want to have. Why is this system so complex? Well, for two reasons: for safety and to increase performance. Now, with brake-by-wire, a lot of things have to go wrong for the car to run out of rear brakes. And the second reason is a performance issue. Drivers want a car that brakes in the shortest possible distance and is as stable as possible, something that is not so easy to achieve because in a Formula One, the braking technique is totally different from that of a road car. The drivers, when they start braking, put their foot down on the brakes in a brutal way. They apply more than 100 kilos of force on the brake pedal, and as they slow down and start to turn, they gradually release the pressure on the brake. Why? Well, to be able to drive at the limit of the grip allowed by the tire. For this reason, the drivers must be able to regulate how the brakes act in each braking and in each different situation in order to be able to make small corrections in case the behavior of the car is not as desired. In a road car, the braking technique is very different for reasons, and the first one is the brake discs. In a Formula One, the speeds are extremely high. Therefore, a lot of heat will be generated when braking and, therefore, the discs, calipers and pads have to be designed to be able to work in a much higher temperature range than in a normal car and must also have the ability to be cooled quickly. For this reason, in a Formula 1 single-seater, the brake discs are made of carbon. In a road car, instead, they are made of steel. Steel discs have a positive point, and that is that their optimum working temperature is much lower, between -50 and 500 degrees Celsius. In a road car, we are not stepping on the brake all the time, nor are there too strong braking. Therefore, temperatures are
Le normative FIA hanno quindi
in a Formula 1, braking is beastly. That's why temperatures soar. We are talking that the discs must work between 400 and 1000 degrees Celsius. So zero is not a valid material for a Formula 1 car. For this reason, teams decide to use another material that works better at high temperatures. And that material is carbon, which, apart from having a good behavior at high temperatures, it also about a brake disc from Formula 1 weighs about a kilo in a street car, usually about 15 kilos, but using this material also has a negative point. And it is that when the discs are cold, they are practically not able to brake so that they work well, they have to be at more than 400 degrees. If you look at the graph, the coefficient of friction between the disc and varies depending on the temperature. What we are interested in is to have the highest possible friction coefficient because in this way the car will be able to brake more due to friction. Well, if you look at it, the optimum temperature is between 400 and 1000 degrees and the maximum coefficient of friction between the disc and the pads is between 0.7 and 0.9. In a street car more or less we are talking about a friction coefficient of 0.4. The temperature issue is very important because if they are not in that temperature range, they will not work properly. For this reason, it is very important to heat the brakes as well as to cool them. Also, if you look at the racing brakes, they are perforated, and as we have said, since a Formula 1 car goes at very high speeds, the heat energy produced is enormous. Therefore, the temperature of the disc increases a lot. For this reason it is important that they are well cooled, so they make holes for them. In 2008 we found brakes with about 200 holes. In 2021 the discs with the highest possible cooling had 1480 holes. What is the idea of making so many holes? Well, the more holes, the better the cooling. And in addition, there is less thermal mass. That is, the disc has less capacity to store the temperature. That is why the temperature range of a brake is so high. At the end of a braking, we can be talking about 800 or 1000 degrees of temperature, and at the end of a straight line the brake can be about 300 or 400 degrees. And if you look at this video, the brake goes from being red hot to a very low temperature in a short time, which is a good thing because carbon behaves well at very high temperatures. However, when such high temperatures are maintained for a long time, the carbon begins to suffer more. In fact, look what happened to Fernando Alonso in the Spanish Grand Prix. He got a tire off in the brake cooling duct and of course, the brakes overheated. And as you can see, it was very difficult to stop the car. Keep in mind that you can't make too many holes either. Every hole you make is decreasing the resistance of the disc. So you have to find a balance between the resistance of the disc and its cooling. So, as you can see, it is very important that the brakes do not overheat. The temperature also affects the speed at which, even if braking is not too hard. The reason why Formula 1 cars brake so hard is because of the brake calipers. These calipers are limited by regulation to 6 pistons and weigh between 1.5 and 2 kilos. In a street car, normally they usually have 2 pistons and weigh about 5 kilos each. In addition, in a single-seater, the caliper is located at the bottom of the disc. Why? Well, because in this way the center of gravity is lowered and, therefore, the car can be more stable. However, it is not placed in the lower area, but a little more upwards in order to be able to bleed the brakes. It may be the case that, due to the high temperatures, small air bubbles are generated in the hydraulic system, which will cause the driver to feel a slightly spongy touch when pressing on the brake. This is solved in a very simple way, and that is by bleeding the system. In this way, the air bubbles are removed and therefore, the rider will have the correct brake feel again. But how much money does a Formula 1 brake cost? Well, you should know that carbon is an expensive and sophisticated material, whose production requires a lot of time, since the carbon is treated to improve the properties and thus can work better. Therefore, the production can take between 5 and 6 months, which makes the price of the brake very expensive. We are talking about 50,000 euros. No doubt it is an absolute barbarity, but to this we must add that every time the car goes out on the track, the pads and discs wear out. And therefore, they have to be changed. Only one brake disc can cost between 2,000 and 3,000 euros and each brake pad about 800 euros. So over the course of a season, teams spend hundreds of thousands of euros on brakes alone.